Okay, next on our agenda is student fees by Mr. Anderson and Mr. Sorensen.
I'll just slide over closer to Mike. Okay. Well, good afternoon, evening, wherever we are. It's good to be with you, and we're excited to have this conversation. And hopefully, as we go through this, we know there will be lots of questions, and hopefully we even brought along Jason Skidmore to help us in case there's some CTE questions along the way. But we just kind of wanted to share and report back to you our discussion that we had recently and kind of our interactions that we had with all of our secondary principals, both middle and high school. And just kind of share with you, this is just a simple overview of what's to come in the presentation. Make sure that as we go through that the fee approval process, we'll kind of discuss that. We'll discuss more specifically the high school registration, elective class fees, the extracurricular and participation fees, the middle school registration, elective class fees, the options that we had and discussions we had with our principals regarding how they address unpaid fees, as well as the middle and high school fund balance overview, and then finally some recommendations that we would like to share with you. First of all, as we go through this, there typically are two pretty common questions that we get, and one of those is, why do we charge fees? And fees are allowed by school districts because taxes alone do not cover all of the school needs. This is in an effort to balance property tax with those utilizing the school system, and a reminder that these are also site-based decisions with limits based on the approval fee schedule that we go through and bring to you as a board to approve. The question has also been asked, do all classes charge fees? Not all classes do, but many do. Many charge fees. And some classes require additional supplies that may have a fee included with that. We also found that all classes may charge a fee if the school determines it is necessary. So a lot of that is on a discussion happening there on site as they go forward with determining what fee is necessary for their classes. Typically, needs are discussed from the department with the local administration. So departments out in the schools will kind of discuss and identify what they feel are some of their needs. They'll bring that to the local administration and have that conversation. And then that does change from year to year. So that is a very fluid conversation and something that we're hoping becomes even more fluid. So I just wanted to kind of put this graph up here and share with you what's been our typical approval process in the past. Typically, what we've done with our secondary principals where fees are allowed is have that conversation with those principals. And that typically takes place at a level meeting with myself, with Mr. Anderson, as we have discussions with our secondary principals and they share some of their thoughts or concerns or their needs. We then review those requests and have that discussion in cabinet. And typically that happens in February, March. And then after we've had that discussion and feel comfortable with what the requests or the needs might be, we present that to the school board for final approval. And that's usually prepared in anticipation for putting that out to the community for the following year. So that's been the typical process that we have followed up to this point. What I want to do is just kind of take a minute and break down again, how is high school required registration fee used? Right, that very first one where it says required fees, that's right out of the approved fee schedule. So that's the language that we have when it comes to the required fee for fully or partially enrolled students. That registration fee on the high school level is $105. Of that $105, and again, we had discussions with principals. We shared with them what are some common uses. How are you using this money that comes to you? There's the $55 of the $155 that is collected remains at the school, and it's used for a variety of events and activities. And you can see several examples that were listed there. These were just some of many. And I know I listed many, but I hope it gives you kind of an idea and a feel of what some of those are and how they're using those fees when they come into the school. You'll also notice that there's the other $50 of the collected money is actually sent back to the district after fee waivers are deducted to supplement other budgets that eventually come back to the school. So those come back annually, such as your textbook, your equipment, supplies, fee waivers, the credit card fees, the media and postage budgets. So all of that is kind of a cycle and a circle. And just again, so you're aware, we have some schools that have more fee waivers than others. And there are actually some schools that $50 doesn't cover all of the fees. And as a district, we've actually cut a check back to the school when that fee waived amount has actually exceeded the amount collected.
So can I pause you and ask
a
question to Mr. Larson? Does that $50 that comes to the district, does that stay within the budget, the student activities budget, or does that move into our general fund?
Great question. Goes to the general fund. It's revenue to the general fund, and these allocations and other items here are spent out of the general fund as well. So it's originally collected in the student activities fund, but then we reverse that out so it's not double counted, but then it's moved over to the general fund.
But the $55 that stays at the school, is that in the student activities, or does that also go out into the general fund?
No, that stays in student activities.
That's in the student activities. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So again, just a reminder, fee waivers are paid by the district, and so that those schools don't feel the impact if they have a higher fee waive population than another one. So that's kind of balanced that way. Class fees, again, just the exact verbiage that comes out of the approved fee schedule there at the top with elective fees and charges. It does identify on there a maximum of 20. Again, some typical uses for these class fees might include, and those things are listed there. One thing that we did find in our discussions and conversations with our principals is there were some that thought this was the required amount to charge. So what that means is they maybe didn't realize that even though it does say maximum in there, when you charge a class fee, we have to charge $20. And so certainly we've had those conversations, we've had those discussions, that those amounts are simply a cap and a maximum as to where they can go. And so hopefully they know that, and we're moving forward as we go. Okay? Again, these fees, as a reminder, they're all site-based.
So Brad?
Yeah.
There's got to be something else here, because my daughter was charged a $120 art fee. Does that fit somewhere else?
So
those are additional.
It depends on the class, and that's where, so if you look, limitations not applicable to elective CTE or CTE projects. So an art fee of $120 may include if they bought themselves an art kit,
right?
Which
that's allowable under policy in spite of the maximum, right?
It is allowable if they feel that they want to have their own art. A lot of kids will. What we're not doing is providing them with a brand new art kit that they can then take home. So kids will purchase the art kit. We do have art kits available for kids to use. So, and that was also some of the concern is, well, I'm not going to sign up for art because it costs me too much, or I'm not going to sign up for auto tech because it just costs me too much money. Or wood shop. You see a lot of those projects in a wood shop class where they're making, a bed. And those projects end up costing quite a bit of money, but it's because those kids want that item and they ultimately are choosing to, and the art kit is kind of the same way. We have these art kits that might be available for $90, and you can have that. You can take that home. But a child can also sign up for that art class and be able to get the same instruction. Now, whether that's the right message that's being sent is a different story. But ultimately, those are the examples of when sometimes those things become more expensive, because they become the kids' property and that's what they want.
But basically what you're saying is that they are still allowed to take the class, they can still participate, and whether or not they choose to elect to bring those items home is whether or not they have that fee attached to it.
That is the message that we hope is being sent, correct. Yeah, and those were discussions that we had, just so you know, with our principals as well. Okay, again, this is just the other fees that exist on the fee schedule, and a lot of these are very specific items. The class change, the makeup quarter, the makeup credit, the test that a child may choose to take. So these are just different things that are on the fee schedule that are not required of anybody unless, they're choosing to do some of that. The summer driver ed is listed in there. If they choose to take the competency test in life fitness, they can choose to do that rather than actually taking the test. So these are just other fees that are on the schedule. Now we get into the required extracurricular participation fees. So this is all of our extracurricular. We've gone through and identified, again, through discussion with our principals about where that should be and has been brought here and approved. You'll notice in some of these up to is identified. I always like to go to swimming. Having been a parent of swimmers, swimsuits are not necessarily something we want to pass on from year to year. So uniform purchases are student purchases, and it's kind of identified that way. But what we try to do is limit the amount that those uniforms can be purchased in those areas. But the others, when you look at a basketball, oftentimes fees or uniforms are passed down from year to year. What was a varsity uniform 1 year oftentimes gets passed down to perhaps the JV team for the next year and so on. So those are the limits that have been created on the fee schedule. Again, important and just so you know how participation fees are used. It's used for a variety of things. Again, I've listed just some of those examples with transportation, the officials, the security, the activity and athletic budgets, the uniforms, equipment, the workers at each of these games. So a lot of the participation fees are used to run these programs, to have those things take place. And oftentimes, in order to do that, it does require a lot of those things, to see that happen.
Are any of these programs sustainable purely on these fees, or is there other budgets that are used to sustain these programs?
I would say participation fees typically are more of a supplemental help. They often exceed. If in our conversations with principals, they feel like they spend more. Sometimes the transportation bill alone may, exceed what they gather or collect with a group, especially sometimes when you're dealing with a smaller group. You're not collecting as much, and so participation fees at our schools don't go to a particular group. What that means is most of our schools have a budget, of participation fee budget, and then they use it for all of the groups.
So what other budget is utilized to sustain these programs?
I would say schools will dip into their general account. They'll use their activity fees. John, what else? Yeah, the gate receipts.
Yeah, gate's a great example. But when he says general account or activity fees, registration fees.
So they will. So they use their registration fees to help. They may have cell tower access to some monies there. They may have some donations or other items that come through from companies that will do some sort of a matching or sponsoring of funds. So that's what general. So they don't get a allocation from the district to sustain their athletic programs.
No, not directly. Indirectly, yes, because we pay for the facilities, we maintain the facilities, and we pay the utilities, which is a large piece of the school.
But the equipment, the bats, the balls, the pads, the track, the hurdles, where does all that come from? Is that supposed to come out of here?
I think they'll use this first. I mean, that's kind of the idea. I'm going to use this up until I need some more.
They can. Certainly they have an equipment budget that could supplement as well, but this would be their first spot to go.
Yeah.
Where do gate revenues go?
Same place.
So they go into this.
It's kind of at the discretion. So wherever those needs arise. I mean, I'll just use an example.
Football brings in a lot more money.
Football tends to bring in the biggest gate, and so oftentimes those gate receipt monies are used to supplement a lot of our other extracurricular activities. Yes.
So can I ask, I'd like to see a trail of where that gate money's going. Like for me, because I've done the math in my head, and I'm not really good at math, but it seems like it should really substantiate, a lot of our programs, and I just don't see that. So maybe I'm just the only board member that cares about that. But.
I think that's we could easily take a gate receipt account from any of the high school, and certainly share that with you, and sit down with you, and show you kind of how the expenditures that have come out of that.
I'd like that.
Yeah. So we wouldn't be opposed to sitting down and doing that. If individually you'd like to look at how is Harriman doing, or where their gate money's going and what is it being used for, I'm sure we could break that down.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Schools, again, have withheld students. So I wanted to share, this was also expressed in our meetings with our principals. This is the area that they battled the most. I mean, it seems that they're fighting more often to get the students to pay these fees. And so in an effort to try to do that, some, schools have withheld students from participating. The expectation is that in order to participate, you need to pay that fee. And so some students have been held out of whatever sport or activity that is until their fee has been paid. But again, this tends to be the area where schools struggle.
I'll just add fee paid or waived.
Yeah.
If it's waived, then they proceed.
Yeah, it's a moot point. So if it's waived. Again, the collected fees that happen here all do remain there at the school to help cover those expenses. The optional Spirit Pack fee, again, the limit that was put on there, these ultimately, when we have conversations, are items that are not required. They're not the basketball uniform that's necessary to be out on the court with, but obviously they supplement game day T-shirts, bows for cheerleaders. I mean, these are the kind of different things that supplement different programs, but are not necessarily required for the participation of these. And it's difficult. It's a challenge, as to where they are and what the minimum or the maximum cost there is $250 for for that optional spirit pack. This is a big area that fundraise monies are used for. We try to provide as many fundraised opportunities for kids, to help cover these expenses as well as other expenses, overnight travel, or when they're, doing different things. There's a variety of fundraisers that each group goes through.
Okay. The middle schools also do have some fees associated with it, although not nearly as many as the high schools. They don't do the activities and don't have quite the needs that the high school have. But when it comes to middle school fees, the required fees, there's a $65 registration fee. And you can see the breakdown. It's similar to the high school, just a little less. 25 of that money remains at the school, and that covers a variety of programs, a lot of the assemblies and the service projects and the field trips and various recognitions, student recognitions throughout the year. That money covers that, much like the high school area. 40 of that goes back to the district, as was described by Brad for the high schools. This money similarly goes to the district, comes back to the middle school in the form of textbook, equipment, and supply budgets. You'll see in there's a required fee currently for the Intro to CTE 7th grade class fee. This is an introductory course for 7th graders that we've scrutinized, and we'll have a recommendation on that later on that I'll discuss here. So there are also elective class fees that can be charged, again, as Brad said, pointing out to the principals and reminding them that this is more of a limit, a cap, if you will, on what they can charge, not a required $10 flat fee. They could charge less than that, but up to that. And examples of what that is going to use for is, it could be software programs, lab supplies, food supplies, etc. Okay, so as Brad pointed out, sometimes we have schools that deal with unpaid fee issues, and this is both at the middle school and the high school, probably at a greater degree in the high school because there are more fees associated with it. We've talked about fee waivers already, and I think it's, again, important to point out that schools are held harmless when it comes to fee waivers. We supplement that, and nobody goes without because of the number of fee waiver students that they have. Especially at the high schools, fundraisers can help cover some of those extracurricular activity expenses. Schools are also open to the idea of payment plans. It's not frequently used, but the option is there if the students come to the administration and say, I'd like to, parents will come work out a payment plan. That's been done in the past. We do have the option to require students to do service for when it comes to fee waivers. This is not widely used. There's the follow-up and it's very difficult to police that and very difficult to oversee that with the service requirement on that. When it comes time, for fees to be paid and there's a lot of communication and things are still not paid and there's outstanding bills or fees, we do have the option to go to collections for those fees, and that's been employed a few times at various schools. Other options include withholding yearbooks or schedules until the last day, just as an incentive. We don't deny anybody those things when school starts or on the last day of school, but up until that point, that has been used as an incentive by some schools to encourage parents to pay those fees. So what we did, we looked at each school individually and looked at every single account in those schools, and we noticed, especially at the middle school, there was a threshold of about $3,000 that we thought was a limit at which we might want to look a little closer. It was a starting point, if you will. And there are over 600 accounts district-wide in all of our middle schools, and 36 of those accounts had over $3,000. And I might point out that this was at the end of the school year last year. So this is in June, where a lot of the budgets had been spent down at the end of the year. We flagged those 36 accounts. So 36 out of over 600, it's about 5 or 6% of those accounts that we looked at that exceeded $3,000 in total. Out of those 36 classes, 14 of them came in the art and performing arts areas, 18 were in CTE classes, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a minute, and 4 in physical education areas. So we have spoken with each middle school principal about their specific budgets that exceeded $3,000 and looked at why. Why does this art teacher, why do they have a fund balance of over $3,000? In many cases, it may have been the intent was to maybe charge an art fee for supplies, but that ended up being paid for out of school supply budgets and not reimbursed out of that budget. And it was just, it crept up over years. That will be rectified as we continue to work with the principals in that area. That's an example.
Did you pull these numbers off the same report that you provided us?
Yes. Yeah. You're seeing the same. Keep in mind it is in the June report. There are two different ones, and we looked at the June report that were in excess of 3,000.
And forgive my ignorance. Typically, when I see a red parentheses, that means it's a negative balance.
Mr. Larson, we had the same question for him on there.
Is that a negative balance, or is that a positive balance in this case?
The way this report came out, this is a positive, yes. It's just the parentheses are indicating the credit.
Okay. No, I just want to make sure that I'm...
That was alarming to us as well. And I might also add, this was for class accounts, not student body general, not...
okay. So that was my next question. Yes. You were just observing
class
account.
Correct.
You were not looking at the student body general, the activity, and those overall.
We've had separate discussions about the activity accounts and the student body general accounts. But this is focusing on the class fees that are charged at the middle schools and high schools only, not the general accounts. Thanks for that clarification.
Yeah, that's not working out for me as far as the number. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. So we've had discussions with them. In many cases, we've encouraged them to have the discussions with their teachers when they want to charge a fee. We have a recommendation that we'll share with you in just a few minutes about how we would like to rectify that.
So on this slide, it's the same. It's the high school. As we looked at that again, just the class fees that are out there, 196 of those were, and we targeted 5,000 on the high school level. And we noticed 41 of those in the art and performing art area, 25 in the CTE area, 6 in the physical education, 95 in club and athletic extracurricular. So a lot of these groups that have been doing their own fundraisers and doing things, 95 of those had a balance of 5,000 or more, and then we had 29 specifically that were in some of the class areas. So as we've had these discussions, and we certainly noticed, and it's been great in these conversations, these are the recommendations that we would like to move forward with and share with you. And the very first recommendation on there is the new approval form implementation. So on the next slide, you'll see what that form looks like. This is currently not necessary. Everything that has been happening up to this point has kind of been verbal. It's been, hey, my group needs this, my class needs this. We want to formalize that a little bit more. We want to, you'll notice at the top of that form, so when a teacher, a coach, whatever an advisor is looking at requesting for a fee to be charged and asking their administration for permission, we want them to acknowledge and recognize that my account's balance is this much. And is that really something I need to move forward with, or is my account balance enough that I don't need to charge a fee this year, or I'm not needing that? Asking them for a rationale as to what it is they're going to be using that money for, and basically the anticipated costs of that as well.
I might just add, one of the things we want to avoid with this is a new teacher that gets hired in art, say, for example, and just because the previous teacher charged $10, they just continue that tradition without maybe taking a closer look at what their budget is. And we want to avoid situations like that. And this will foster an opportunity for the teacher to have a discussion with the head secretary and the principal so that they know exactly where their budgets are and they can make those informed decisions on the fees.
Every class, every year. Every class that charges a fee, every year.
Every year. Yep. That's our recommendation. And again, just so you know, we've shared this with our principals. They are all on board. They recognize the need to have more specific conversations with their teachers, with their advisors, with their coaches, about different things. And so they would like to do this as well. They recognize some of their balances have ballooned up. We'd also like to propose a clarification of the fee schedule. We've had those conversations with our administrators that a maximum, but I think we can be more specific on the fee schedule, that it's up to this amount. So whether it's $10, the class fee is up to $20, but it doesn't need to be $20. So we want to clean that up a little bit. As the administrators of schools, we've kind of identified that we want to have this conversation probably twice a year. So in the months of January and June, that the AOS will review the balances with the principals to determine which fees may need to be reduced or eliminated on an annual basis. We'd also like to present, an anticipated future approval fee to the school community council, similar to what's done with fundraisers currently. So I know both Harriman and Bingham have done this recently, where they've shared some of the fees that they, as an administration, or the fundraisers, that's what they do now. So not necessarily for the approval of the council, but in an awareness that here's, in having conversation with my staff, these are the fees that we're looking, to charge in anticipation for the next year.
I just want to emphasize what a good process this was, to be able to sit down with each principal and have these discussions. As we scrutinized the budgets, one of the things that stuck out to us at the middle level was the large balances in the CTE areas. And you'll notice from a previous slide that we have a 7th grade required fee of $20 for the CTE intro class. That's a class that covers, it's called Intro to College and Career, and they take a different class each quarter, and they're introduced to a variety of courses. Well, we noticed balances in those areas that exceeded what we thought they needed to. And because of that, in talking with Mr. Skidmore and the other CTE consultants and principals in the middle level, we asked ourselves, do we really need that fee? And in consultation with the CTE department and the principals, we've concluded that we can discontinue that fee, or it would be a recommendation to discontinue that fee. And we think also, if there were a need, for instance, at a school that a teacher felt the need to have additional monies in their CTE course, they can still go through the fee approval form that we just introduced and still charge a fee if they felt it was prudent. But mandating a fee of $20 at the 7th grade, we feel that can be eliminated. And so that would be our recommendation.
And then just lastly, continuing to educate our administrators and our principals that the money we collect during the year from these kids should be spent on these kids. And that's kind of the idea and the goal. And they're on board with that. I want you to know that they agree and they want to spend. I think we all have a little bit of conservative nature in us, that we all just want to be on the positive side. I want to say red, but now red's different. But we do want to be on the positive side of things. And so there has been some conservative approaches, but they recognize and understand that idea that if we're going to collect fees from these kids, then we're going to turn around and spend it on these kids.
The term this year's money for this year's students has been echoed in their ears several times, and I think they're picking up on that. They agree to it, as Brad said. I mean, that's something we feel is important. So thank you.
Questions or comments?
I think it's a fantastic idea to get the school community council involved to see what is being proposed for that next year. That just helps the community to have a better understanding. And when we have parents that have questions, I as a parent would know, okay, my school community council has seen this. They've asked questions. Maybe I can ask them, or I can ask staff. I just think it's a good place to put that. And I just want to say thank you so much to Mr. Anderson, Mr. Sorensen, and Mr. Skidmore. I appreciate all of your work, and I know that Mr. Sorensen, you sat down with me for a lengthy amount of time and have answered parent-specific questions for myself, and I really appreciate all the work that you've done. It really means a lot to me, and I know that it really means a lot to other parents. And what I'm actually going to do is message parents that had questions. I'm going to ask them to listen to this board meeting because of that. So thank you.
Thank you. Just if the board is good with us including that as a recommendation for the school community councils, we would include that in the next year's training. It's not a state requirement. It's not something that we would have necessarily an accountability on that we'd have to turn in and report, but certainly we would encourage and admonish our schools to include that in their as part of their yearly program.
So does that include the 105 and the 60? The school community council wouldn't necessarily consider what we consider the required fee.
No.
These are just the class
again, this is, and I don't think, I think a clarification to make there would be that they aren't necessarily approving those fees. It would be more by way of information to the school community council. This is what we've been requested by the teachers. This is what we've approved. We wanted to make sure you were aware, receive feedback from the council, make sure before going forward at least there was an information that was shared with the council. And those fees, although we wouldn't go over the 105 and approve that, but I think it would be a really important part of the training is to tell them exactly what the breakdown for that fee is and where it goes and how it comes back to the school and how fee waivers work and things like that. I think I received, as a principal, several phone calls like that. We still receive several phone calls each year. And once we break down the amount of where that money goes, people are generally good with that. They understand, that it's not just going into a black hole, that there's a way that money goes and is spent.
And there's so many things that money is spent on. Just that little list that you gave us here is just the tip of the iceberg. So for those parents to see that, I know that when you explained it to me, Mr. Sorensen, it opened up my eyes, and I'm excited for the school community council to see that because it is a school-based decision. So if we can have the school community councils see those fees and how their principals are spending those fees, I think it'll be just so much better for that community to have a better understanding.
I've got a couple comments on this issue. I appreciate the level of the depth and the work that's gone into this. I think there's still lots of work to do. I'd like to point out to the board and anybody who has access after tonight to our annual financial statements. If you go to page 71 of the CAFR, that shows our student activities fund. And our expenditures in 2017, in the 16-17, was $6.5 million. Our fund balance at the end of that same period was $7 million. So we have in excess of 100% of our annual expenditure sitting in our fund balance. That is not a good thing. That means money that has been collected from our students and our parents over years has not been going towards those students' education. And that's got to stop. It is wise to have adequate fund balances, but 100% of your annual expenditures it's crazy. And there were some documents shared with us that are under the confidential, so I don't know if I can talk to that information. But we just received that in two simple categories that our principals, I believe, have direct. So I think it's good that our principals are starting to have this conversation with their teachers. They need to lead out by example. I found well over $1 million sitting in two accounts between our middle schools and our high schools. That is, in my understanding, completely at their discretion. So I think we're on the right track. But I believe there needs to be that bottom point needs to be continually reinforced, and we have to have a greater appreciation for the fact that just because we can doesn't mean we should, and just because we can doesn't and just because we're about educating our children, our students, doesn't mean we have the right to pick the pockets of our parents just because we can. And this level of fund balance suggests to me that has not been made clear, and that is not the culture that we have in this district. And so, again, I praise the work that's been done. I think it's a start and not a finish.
Yes, Mr. Lyon.
I agree with Mr. Young. I think it is a start, not a finish. What I've been very pleased to watch in this process is providing information, seeing that information taken, and the AOSs running with it. And I really want to thank Mr. Anderson, Mr. Sorensen for the work they've done on this, because this easily could have been pointed back and said, well, that's the business. Instead, they ran with it and said, well, we oversee the schools. We can work with the principals. We were principals. And it's I just really want to applaud their efforts on this, and I love this form. I love the idea that the teachers and the coaches and advisors go then to the principal and say, well, I have this much in my account currently, but I want to charge this much more, and here's why. And there's that discussion then becomes much more in depth. It's going to be a continuing effort for sure. But
and part of that continuing effort, and we've had discussions in cabinet, as part of that continuing effort, this is step one of many to come, is additional training, making sure that we know our administrative assistants, our head secretaries, and the principals feel empowered and knowledgeable as to what they can and cannot use those accounts for. Make sure that they feel empowered to do that, and make sure they're informed, and then they can make those decisions. As you know, the CFO, CEO, and chief cook and bottle washer of their particular schools.
And I think a lot of times the problems maybe arise because of change in staff, forever turnover, and a new person comes on and they say, well, this is what's always been charged, so that's what I'll charge, and they really don't have a reason or any kind of need, but they just do it because that's what's been done. So I think that needs to be looked at. I think that's very wise.
I agree.
I just wanted to thank you for not ducking the issue and really coming up with some solid things. Can I just throw a couple concerns in it that I have? Is once we charge that activity fee, it seems that we charge additional activity fees throughout the year. For instance, a dance. And a dance that's held in this building that we own, calculated by the number of people come and the cost of having the building and all of that. And my head doesn't make a break-even point, and it seems like we're making money. Another one that I'm really concerned with is the $5 fee for a yearbook stump. When they've purchased a yearbook, it's the only really place a kid can go and get his yearbook signed, but we're charging an additional $5 when they paid an activity fee earlier in the year. And so I would hope that step 2, 3, and 4 would also address those additional fees that we charge over and above. And I'm not saying that a stomp should be free, but they should be revenue-based, neutral, and we shouldn't be making money off of kids who are coming here for a dance. My daughter said they didn't give refreshments, but she probably just didn't see the table. Her date was probably eating them all. But anyways, so I hope that we'll address that as part of the future and figure out, is it appropriate to charge kids a yearbook stomp fee when we have this activity fee that they've already paid.
We try to encourage them to come to school the next day, Daryl. So
the problem is
their yearbook then.
The problem is we used to do that. We used to give out the yearbook and then have school the next day. But really, the way, especially if you're a senior, but if you don't go to that yearbook stomp, you really don't get your yearbook signed. That's the bottom line. The way we've done it, we used to give out yearbook during the school day, and everyone would go from class to class to get it signed. And I just look at the differences of the kids that come over to my school to get their yearbook, and I'm like, well, why don't you have any signatures? Why didn't go to the stomp? You know, and I think there is some kids that are not going to the stomp because they can't pay the $5, and there's not really a waiver on that. So, anyways, that's a big concern I hope that we'll address in the future.
Are there any other comments or questions?
I did just want to address the process. Because last year, when the fees were presented, the concern was raised, many on the board suggested would have liked to have addressed it, but felt like there just wasn't time with what had to get out. And so I'm seeing here that the calendar says now present fee schedule to school board for final approval March/April. And so does that create the ability for a board to say, does this timeline still put a board in a position where we can't say no? And we have to wait till the following year to do anything about it?
That's a good question. I'll say what I want and then pass it to Brad. I think given what you just described, I think a expedited timeline, maybe just moving that up all by a couple of months would be better. That way, when we start building our boards and start staffing and start our course offerings, they know going into it what the ramifications and what the parameters are, perhaps on their fees. I think it would be as fast as we can before the March-April. In regards to the CTE class fee that we recommend be taken off, I don't know if you need to take an official vote on that to approve it. I think we do, but that will be on there. But with the consensus here tonight, it would be good to be able to go back and report that to the principals and have them start planning accordingly. Now, if that would be helpful.
I would like to see this, and the rest of I'd like to see this schedule moved up so that is no longer an impediment to this board making a sound decision.
When would you like? We could provide it whenever you would like it. Would you like it in February, or are you thinking?
When?
I think February is a fair time.
What is the latest in which we can look at it, suggest changes or suggest
go back and make
work, and have that be done, and not put the board in not this board, whatever building the boards, whatever you're talking about, at a disadvantage. That would be my
February. Honestly, I think February is something that's doable. It gives us an opportunity to start having those conversations with our high schools and middle schools now. It's just moving that conversation up sooner. They're not usually thinking of next year this early, but that can certainly be a discussion that we have.
I think our recommendations are for next year already have been made. So the CTE course fee in the 7th grade, making the language change on the course offerings that says up to. I don't think at this point, we don't have any other recommendations than that. So our next principal meeting, we can review that with them, make sure they're good with it, and we can bring it back at the board meeting after that if you wanted to with the recommended changes. It's not, I think we've already got to a point where we know what we want to recommend for next year.
I think there'll be more questions this next year than there will be in other years too. So,
quite frankly, after looking at some of the balances, I'm not comfortable that our standard fee is justifiable. I'll just be, even if it's $5 less than what we're charging right now, I don't see that there's a justification for what we're charging with what we have. And so, if what you're saying is there are no other suggested changes, I am saying right now I am uncomfortable with what is there. And so that, given what I'm seeing as balances in categories of which there is discretion I'm not comfortable with it. But again, I'm one.
I'm two.
Is that the general fees?
Yeah, that's the one that I'm.
And I would tell you the conversations with the principals are that they would stress out if they knew that was going down. So just on the counter of that, they would be a little worried, if that money that was coming in would be less than that.
Well, then
that's the conversations that we've had.
And the only way to lower it is spending, though.
Correct.
We would not be comfortable with that.
But if I understand the balance correctly, we could go an entire year not charge any fees and end that year zero.
In some schools, that case is more accurate than others.
So do we really need to be, drilling down to those schools that are just keeping the higher balances?
I would say, again, the report that I'm referring to, I believe was just posted today.
Correct.
And so some of you, I just started looking at it it's very instructional, and I would submit to you that each of us needs to be looking at that
closely
and then circling back.
A lot of these fees are in categories that are restricted, if you will, from the principal because it's been fundraised for a specific purpose or charged for a specific purpose. Other categories are not. So as you look at these, if you have questions or concerns, it might help to communicate those, and then we can research and redirect or come back with them. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Because if you look at one category, it may, because of the time frame that these are pulled, something may be happening in there.
I looked at the June report.
Okay.
That's the one I was just perusing. And I looked at two, one called General and one called Activity. Those seem to me to be very at the principal's discretion.
So maybe let's look at those further, because until I dive in further, I don't know whether or not that was before the fee waivers were applied or not. Does that make sense? And every school is going to be unique in that aspect. So let's address those questions.
Then we will assume that there will be additional information forthcoming once we know that information.
But can I?
Yes.
I would like the fee. What do we call it? The fee request form. I'd love to see that go out now, so that as teachers are requesting for what you're going to bring to us in February, that's implemented. Let's not wait till February to implement that. I'd love to see that go out immediately so that anyone who from this moment out requests a class fee is required to fill out that form and have those discussions.
Thank you. That's what I wanted to clarify. If you're good with, if we have the consensus tonight to go back and do that with the class fee change or the class fee form, as well as just letting them know that if there are any opposition to the CTE intro $20 fee, we would want to know that so we can have a discussion with the principals. But if there's consensus on that, we can let them know and start planning accordingly.
And really emphasize that, spending the money on the students the current year.
Continue that.
I'm thinking maybe some of those large amounts that are left over, they're saving for a project or a piece of equipment or something, and it needs to be spent on those students.
Everyone in agreement with those comments from Mr. Anderson? I don't see any dissension, so we'll direct you to that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
We'll take draft off the form.
Thank you.
We will now have a 10-minute break before we start our open session. So everyone has opportunity to get a drink, etc.